So yeah, this is Does Artificial Intelligence Use Private Language by Ryan Miller, and this is Proceedings in the International Ludwig Wittgenstein Symposium. Let me know if you have any questions along the way, but I'm going to start reading now. And yeah, feel free to interrupt. The private language argument, PLA, found at Phil Investigations 243 to 271, is perhaps Ludwig Wittgenstein's most lasting contribution to philosophy. I mean, this is a sociological thing. I don't think this is like the most lasting thing, but fine. I mean, I got my freaking duck rabbit. I like my duck rabbit. That's at duck rabbits are in section 10 or 11, 11 of part 2. All right, maximalist readers of the argument, like Saul Kripke and John McDowell, hold that the private language argument (PLA) requires a wide-ranging reappraisal of philosophy of mind. Nonetheless, other philosophers of mind, like Jerry Fodor, are very dismissive of the generality and force of the PLA. While Fodor remarks are brief, I will argue later, based on a misreading of Wittgenstein, Fodor offers a more interesting rejoinder based on the existence of computer languages. I show that Fodor's argument requires a setting of artificial intelligence, AI, that is deep learning neural networks rather than ordinary software, but that what we now know about AI fails to validate Fodor's argument. The language of AI is not private, and so Fodor's counterexample to the PLA fails. The plan of the paper is following. First, introduce a formal version of the much contested private language argument, show why Fodor's language of thought program is in tension with it, and review Fodor's response to the PLA. Second, investigate Fodor's computation counterexample to the PLA in detail and show that it requires an AI setting rather than Fodor's more general framing. Finally, show that Fodor's counterexample fails given what we now know about AI, leaving the PLA untouched. Oh yeah, there was a movie about that, Stranger Than Fiction. Yeah, Adam Fighter got it, Stranger Than Fiction. Yeah. Oh, you're not streaming tonight, Nan? Okie dokie, that's cool. All right, Wither private language. All right, yeah. So again, the beetle in the box is like, do you actually have an internal monologue that is separate, that is unique to you? This is the private language argument that other people do not have access to. They cannot have access to. Is a private language that only you have access to, that only you have in your head. This is not saying like you have a narrator of English or Spanish or German, whatever language you speak. That's a public language. You have a private language that is unique to you that you cannot express to other people. And so you can actually discuss this in other contexts. So people who have revelation, who's talking to them that they can't describe it? Like, where is that language coming from? People who get messages from God. Is that a private language? Is that something other people can't hear? Like, there's a lot of stuff wrapped up in this. So, Wither private language. Wittgenstein's argument against the possibility of private language in the philosophical investigations is much contested, with critics failing to agree even on which section of the text is supposed to present the argument, and Kripke's clear and influential presentation of the private language argument derided as a mind meld called Kripkenstein, rather than accurate exegesis of Wittgenstein. Yeah, this is no joke. People say, well, this is Kripkenstein, which is Kripke's version of Wittgenstein, because it's become like its own little beast on its own. Given the length constraints here and the focus on AI rather than on human language, I will avoid detailed exegesis and instead rely on Harris's more modest reconstruction, which goes as follows. So premise 1, language. Language implies rule following. Language is used only if rules are followed. So like you can imagine that you can say, look, you're speaking language when you follow the grammatical rules of language. That's this sort of idea here. P2, normativity. Rule following implies the possibility of systematic error. So I actually had not read that it said that, but like that's what the logic said. So it means if you were following grammatical rules, you could fuck up the grammatical rules, but you would still be following the grammar in a fucked up way. Yeah, so you could do that. Premise 3, subjectivity. The possibility of systematic error implies not the case that rules known wholly by introspection. So yeah, you can't necessarily figure, if you can make systematic error, that means like you could be fucking up the grammar on a regular basis. That means you can't just realize you're fucking up, otherwise you'd realize you were fucking it up. Premise 4, privacy. If you don't know the rules by pure introspection, you just can't figure out the rules of grammar on your own, then it's not wholly grounded by internal mental life. So that means what it says here is epistemic access outside pure introspection precludes internal mental grounds, that is privacy. That means you don't have a mental language that is correct, that you're comparing the rules of grammar you're comparing it to. Otherwise, you could say, hey, look, this is a sensible human language, and then you're comparing your rules to it, because then you couldn't be fucking up the rules all the time because you'd know you were saying something stupid. Because the internal language you had would be like you'd be mistranslating it constantly, but then you'd realize eventually, hey, what I said over here wasn't the same thing as what was going on in my head. All right. And lastly, C, language means it's not grounded wholly by internal mental life. Yeah, so there has to be something outside of your head that you're actually getting to fuck up grammar. And says, what about speaking in a way that you know is going against language but is very cultural to you, so you use it anyway? Like in my accent and dialect, we mess up a lot, but we speak in those ways. It's right for the same, but not for the generic forms. No, but see, here's the thing. It's still public because it's right for your area and you guys know what you're talking about. You're not fucking up when you're talking with your friends and you have like a private joke, private language, private dialect. That's not what's going on here. The question is, do you have something that you cannot explain to other people, literally no one else? Like something like your internal dialogue that you cannot tell other people. So it's not that you have a regional dialect or even a private little code between your friends, and you could be fucking up on purpose, but you know it's a fuck up and they know you're fucking it up. That's public. That's not what, the distinction between public and private is actually kind of critical here. The private is extremely private, only to you, solipsistic level privacy. There is no one else in the world that can talk. So what you're talking about would still count as public in this thing. Emojis, influence in language. Yeah, that's fucking up everything. But I mean, you got to think we've had emoticons and back to ancient Greek with images and the Chinese and Japanese pictographic sort of things. We've always had this sort of pictures in our written word. So Cubana, she's Ecuadorian. Yeah, señorita. We mess up a lot. Yeah, American English. That's right. We are not speaking the Queen's English here in the United States of America. Okay. So this argument is deductively... All right, so here you asked about valid. Deductively valid by conditionalization. That means they did not fuck up any of the arguments. That doesn't mean it's true, because it might not be sound. You might disagree with them, but the argument is not fucking anything up. That's what they mean by deductively valid here. So disputing the conclusion requires disputing the truth of one or more of the premises. See, that's saying, okay, you didn't fuck up the argument, but it might not be sound. The truth is might be off of one of these premises. And the conclusion that it's there's something other than the internal state that is has to do with language. Okay. So Fodor's influential language of thought program is in tension with the private language argument because Fodor argues as follows. So this Fodor's argument, and Fodor is a rather famous philosopher. I think he's still alive. I don't remember. Jerry Fodor. You can look him up if you want to. I think he's I don't know. Okay, premise 1. Cognitive science is true. That is, its leading theory about human mind are correct. So, cognitive science is, pretty true. Premise 2. Cognitive science implies computation. Cognitive science tells us that the human mind is computational in nature. A lot of people are going to agree with this statement right here, that the human mind is computational in nature. All right, premise 3. If it's computational, then there is a language of thought. I mean, what is it computing if it doesn't have some sort of language that it is computing in? And the conclusion is there is a language of thought. Yeah, so that's how it goes. Viper says, if you're still alive, that means the 4-door error comes after the 2-door error. Yes, that's terrible. Okay, so here the conclusion follows by 2 applications of modus ponens, but Fodor also holds that premise 4, if there's language of thought, then it's not possible that you can have a systematic error. So that means if it is computational, you are not systematically fucking up because the computation wouldn't go through, I guess, at that point. So that's what this formula means. It's not a crazy formula. The language of thought is incapable of systematic error. Uh, Nevertheless, one must concede that the manner in which the British composed their prose is indeed rather delightful. I mean, the ones who are good at it. I'm sure there's absolute garbage coming out of Britain too. You don't get to read that though. It's you can have a what's it called? Selection bias. The stuff that you actually get around to reading is going to be the stuff that made it out because it is good. Anyhow, if Fodor were to grant normativity and language, that's this stuff up here, the private language argument, then by two applications of modus tollens, his language of thought would cease to be language at all, in contradiction to the spirit of complang. The complang is that it's computational. Okay, Fodor therefore takes his language of thought program as a reductio ad absurdum of one of the first two premises of the private language argument. In the language of thought revisited, Fodor rejects language. So that was premise one of the private language argument. Here, Fodor follows Rushree's reconstruction of the private language argument, where the requirement of rule following for language is taken to follow the further hidden premise. So this is a hidden premise. If language, then... Oh, let's just read this. I don't know what the symbol exactly means. It's learned or it's communicated. Language is always either learned or used for communication. Okay? And then there's another one. If it's learned or it's communicated, then it is for rule following. So learned and use for communication both requires following rules. So if you're learning it and using it for communication, you have to be following rules. Fodor takes the language of thought as a counterexample to this language perp thing, that it's either learned or used for communication. So I guess he just says, since it's supposed to be innate and internal, leaving language unmotivated. The troubles with Fodor's defense here is twofold. First, Ries gives no textual evidence for his contention that language is motivated by these other things, and many influential interpreters of the private language argument, like McDowell, seem to hold it on different grounds that would apply to a language of thought. Okay, let me just give you a little history. Rush Ries was one of Wittgenstein's friends, and so maybe Rush Ries is interpreting this because he said, well, this is kind of what was meant, but that isn't what everyone agrees. So the idea that it's always learned or it's used for communication is a little bit funky. There's something a little bit funky about restricting what it is that language is. So, okay, so second, Fodor insists that both 4 and 5, and so two different publications, that the language of thought always refers determinately. For example, the concept rabbit always determinately refers to and only to rabbits. This kind of determinate reference seems suspiciously like rule following, since if rabbit sometimes refers to dogs, then rabbit would fail to follow the rule that concepts in the language of thought always have a determinate reference. Yeah, it seems really strong, saying one word always for one reference. Is DNA a private language part of the problem? Good evening, Lumpy Dragon Potato. How you doing? I hope you're well. I was lurking your Minecraft earlier. I hope all is well with you. It was kind of, I'm a little burnt out. I was wanted to do stuff today, but did not get a whole lot done. But at least I can give you a shout out. Everyone go hang out with Lumpy. Oh yeah, and when Vipers, are you gonna, when you start streaming again, I can shout you out again too. But yeah, Lumpy is a streamer. He's a chemist. And, does fancy things with chemistry, puts all the little chemistry blocks together very well for, gets paid money for that. But on Twitch, he streams Minecraft, yes. And makes these sort of fantasy buildings, and it's really quite fascinating. So go hang out at Lumpy's on, Sunday mornings and other times. You're okay. Imagine you cook your tagine and prepare my week. That sounds good. Sounds pretty good. Yeah, okay. So what we're talking about here is is there private language? Is there a language that you can speak only to yourself and no one else? So, questions. And it matters here because of if you can do that, that kind of is in tension with what we think how artificial intelligence speaks. Because artificial intelligence speaks in terms of code, which we can read. And that's not how we think of our private language. Viper says I should be streaming again soon. My current network adapter keeps randomly disconnecting, but a new one should arrive tomorrow. Okay. I'm serious. With DNA count as a private language? No. Language or some sort of genetic code. are you saying genetic code is a language, like as a DNA, like in terms of coding it? There are massive problems with interpreting exactly how, like it makes sense that like, okay, DNA recombines and stuff, but like it's actually way more complicated because you need a whole system that can interpret the DNA, which includes, people. So like DNA only makes sense in terms of like human biology, and then human biology only works in like societies, and it gets actually extremely hard to tease it out. Now, have we embedded programs into our DNA? Yes, scientists have done this. Can we interpret those programs with computers? Yes. But like, are you saying that like the way humans work in the world can be encoded in a can that exactly line up with a computer program? Probably not, because then you would have to say human society is like an interpretation device, and that would be a much harder argument to push through, because it's not just one person that makes a person. It's like the whole sort of, you have to have food, you have to have like help to like raise a kid, and so it's like, does that actually work? It gets a little bit more difficult to argue. Lumpy says it's the least private language. Yeah, it has to be completely and not analyzable by all things in some sense. So, not for semioticians, it isn't difficult. Well, yes, but in what space do the semioticians work? Like that would be a logical space, which is very different than that's definitely not a private language. Like logic is not a private language. So I doubt semiotics would be either. Adam Fighter says language emerges in a community. This community hands down the meaning of the symbols to the next gen. See, that's the thing. Like, if you're gonna have like this sort of community-based thing, then is the community a language processor? Which is a strange thing to call a community. Now, people interpret language. Does the community interpret language? And like, how would that work exactly? So it gets really hard to get to specify what's going on and what's doing the actual interpretation at that point. So yeah, you could say society is in fact a sign interpretation mechanism. So yeah, like we do public works and we change how this stuff is. We have like laws and stuff, and like the way our laws are interpreted is ingrained in parts of our institutions, things like that. So it gets, but like I say, this gets complicated if you want to go down that route. So yeah. But yeah, as Lumpy says, it's definitely not private then. Adam says you agree. Believe this idea of community is what Wittgenstein believed. Wittgenstein had this idea of a form of life. Like, so it wasn't just person. It was that we participate in a whole form of life with other people. And so it's like this sort of community-based form of life gives meaning to our signs, I think. And that's kind of how he cashed it out, is that we participate in forms of life. And that's, so you can go look that part up. And Farrell says, as a member of a community, we all assume that the other people we talk to know the signs and rules and interpret them in the same way we do. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. You have to believe that like people are at least getting close to understanding what you're saying. Viper says, based only on Lumpy and myself, if French is the language of love, Irish must be the language of masturbation. I think everyone masturbates, though, Vipers. I don't know if you have a the lion's share of that. And Vipers broke chat. Alright, so we're still finishing up this little argument that Vipers had. I will never buy Irish cream again. Wait, what? Interestingly, however, Fodor makes a more sustained and serious argument against normativity rather than language, using a detailed analysis of the nature of computation, which he ignores in the later volume. It is to this earlier argument against the claim that rule following implies the possibility of systematic error that I now turn. And says, I gotta know that when I use the word cynic in English, I am not using it in the same sense in Spanish at all, because your interpretation of that is different. Yeah, I mean, this is what happens. I know even across the different Spanishes that are spoken in Latin America, there are different words. I used to have a job where there were people from various Spanish-speaking countries, and one time a guy was saying something about somebody else, and one of the ladies got very angry with him, and she was like, "Why did you say that horrible thing about this person?" He said, "I didn't say anything horrible." But she said, "You use this word." He says, "Yes, that means a woman." He says, "That does not mean a woman. It means a woman of a certain kind, a low kind, where I'm from." And, that was bad, though. Like, they were in a little bit, she got very offended, and it was just a, cross-cultural use of it, the same word in Spanish. Yeah. Classic Sunday evening slumps, yeah. Cynic was a philosopher, though. Yeah, well, it's a kind of philosophy. It comes from Diogenes back in the day, because he liked to live with dogs. Yeah. So, yeah, and I mean, of course, you can have overlapping words in English, but of course they'll mean slightly different things there, too. Sometimes more or less overlapping. Fodor's dilemma. While Fodor's argument in both language of thought volumes is about human concept use, his belief that human thinking is computational leads him to an analogy with computer languages. Here, Fodor offers a constructive dilemma for the partisan of the private language argument. Computers use language for computation, that is, software programs are executed in programming languages, so that languages either is or is so that language use either is or is not grounded in the internal mental life of the computer. No, there was a dude named Cynic, wasn't there? No, there was a Diogenes was a cynic. Cynic meant dog back in Greece. Yeah, it just meant dog. And so he was the dog philosopher. They just referred to him. It was his nickname was dog. The dog. So it's Diogenes. That's all it comes down to. And he was one of the first cynics. Mm-hmm. So I call myself a neo-cynic. Like I like that sort of stuff. Wait, he used to look up to Diogenes because he said he was surrounded by bitches? Well, not incorrect. Not incorrect. In the first form of the dilemma, grounding computer language use in the internal mental life of the computer leads to a reductio ad absurdum against normativity. In the second form of the dilemma, grounding computer language use outside the internal mental life of the computer leads to an argument that no mental phenomena are ever private, whether linguistic or otherwise, so the private language argument is trivially satisfied and utterly irrelevant. I review the prospects for each horn of the dilemma in turn. Yeah, Diogenes is gaining some popularity. I think with the recent popularity of Stoicism has had a bit of a resurgence. That is not that far from Cynicism. The Stoics are an offshoot of the Cynics. So, like, the Cynics were earlier, and then the Stoics, came out of that, and they did their own thing. So I think it's getting some more love. Yeah, so yeah, and that's the famous story that Adam Fighter is saying that, Alexander the Great, who is the lead who took over the entire known world at the time, comes in to see Diogenes, and Diogenes is laying there catching some rays, and Alexander says, "Is there anything I can do for you, Diogenes?" Because, like, he heard this is like the great philosopher. Diogenes is like, "Get out of my son." Like, that's all he wanted. Just move. So, yeah. But I mean, that's like saying, the most powerful person in the entire world comes to you and says, "Do you want something?" You're just like, move. Go. That's it. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what they do in Greece. They, go swimming, eat some olives, catch some rays. All right. So, okay. So we're talking about why the mind is not like a computer, according to the private language argument. For the first horn of the dilemma, Fodor, unlike his later volume, begins with a justification for the claim that computer language use is rule following. So if you have the language of a computer, then you are following rules. Full stop. Just says that. Computer languages follow rules, he says, because their use comports with the conditions specified in the representation in an appropriate meta-language. We might think of this as the process of formal software verification, where a program is checked for correctness by a provable relation between its inputs and outputs in a formal meta-language used by the verifier. To this universally instantiated version of language, Fodor adds premises 2 to 4 of Wittgenstein's original private language argument. So this is the same ones from before. If there's rule following, then there's the possibility of error. The possibility of error means that you it can't be known just by figuring it out yourself. And if you can't figure it out by yourself, then it's not entirely grounded by an internal mental life. So it means there has to be something else outside that's looking at it. But here we go. Next comes the premise for the first horn of the constructive dilemma, that computer language use is, in contradiction to the conclusion of the private language argument, grounded wholly by the internal mental life of the computer. So computer language is grounded wholly by the internal mental life. Now, twice over conditionalization on modus tollens. If it's grounded wholly by that, then okay, then there is no possibility of systematic error, and if there's no systematic error, then it is not rule following. So basically, this is just in philosophy lingo, one person's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. So if you're just denying the conclusion, that means the other people's premises are wrong. That's it. And so basically by saying computers can be verified that their inputs and outputs are correct and according to rules, then it follows that you can actually say that you can guarantee that it's grounded by an internal mental life because it's guaranteed by those rules of the formal language, the computer program. So if you can guarantee that the language can be is formal in that it follows exactly the rules of a program, then you can say the mental life exists because we can point to that formal computer language, and that's what it is. And so that is the private language. Okay, since the conclusion contradicts the first premise of the private language, we have a reductio ad absurdum of the set of premises. All right, thanks for the lurk, Adam. As the first premise is taken as an empirical fact, the fifth premise is merely assumed by constructive dilemma. One of the core premises of the private language argument must go, and Fodor thinks that normativity is the most dubious. In any case, the result of the first horn of dilemma is that the private language argument is unsound, and thus need not worry the advocates of the language of thought program. Yeah, so if you have a verified program that speaks, that has a language, then you can guarantee that's guaranteed to follow all the rules of your formal programming language. Then you can say, hey, look, they're all right there, no problem. And you can say it can talk to itself, figure it out what the rules of thought are, the rules of language are. Okay. Naturally, defenders of the private language argument will wish to avoid this result by exploring the other horn of the constructive dilemma offered by Fodor, replacing one of these things with the language of the computer implies that it's not wholly grounded by internal mental life, that there can be an epistemic access to computer language use outside of the internal mental life of the computer, that is publicly. So that means it's not just verifying itself that it is following the rules, but somehow we are, can interact with this. Okay, Fodor, however, presses defenders of the private language argument by asking what could motivate that we could actually go in and figure out what the computer is doing on its own. After all, again following Rush-Rees' analysis, Wittgenstein's example of the public nature of language come from this claim: language is public. Language is public when it is learned or used to communicate. Computer languages, though, are like language of thought, are neither learned by the computer nor used by the computer to communicate its output. Rather, they are fundamentally computational. Yeah, it's like we can read them, but it's not what the computer's doing. Like the computer is just using it and it's not learning it. So it's not communicating it using it. Like, who of us, like when we look at the computer, we're not talking to it in C. We're using the keyboard to talk to the computer. That's not the language C, even though our computers are usually written in something like C, which is a programming language. It's called, there was an A, there was a B, and then there was a C. This was C. So that's what it is. But like we don't talk to it using C. We type on keyboards and whatever, usually not using C. And then, and it doesn't give us C output either. Rethia says, could you please tell me everything you know about how Leibnizian views on the fabric of space-time exist? You learned Pascal at school, yeah. So C is like Pascal. Well, not. It's just a programming language or two. All of it is binary, though. Yeah, and we definitely do. You can program in binary if you're insane, but like we do not program it. We don't speak in binary to computers, and computers don't output in binary. It has to be. We have some sort of interpreted. I do not remember a whole lot of my Leibniz at this point, Rethius. You have to go into something called monads and stuff. It gets complicated. I can tell you one important argument off the top of my head, though, and that was the argument between Leibniz and Newton on the whether the universe is absolute, if space is absolute or is space relative. And Leibniz maintained that space-time, like physical space-time, is relative because God would not have made a universe that is empty. God would only make a universe with stuff in it. So therefore, if there is space, there is something in it. So space is always relative to the objects in space. Newton had absolute space-time because it was just a mathematical construct where you could have infinite space going off even if there was nothing in it. And so there was an argument between Newton and Leibniz, what was the nature of space-time, and Newton had to concede defeat because they were both religious folks, and so Newton said, why would God make empty space? Like just infinite and empty space, it would be pointless. So space has to be relative. And of course, nowadays we have general relativity. And so it is Leibniz got the last laugh in the end. It's theological, but in some sense you can still think of oh yeah, welcome in, Ivan Neal. How you doing? I hope your stream went well. We're talking about private language and AI at the moment, but Rithi has asked me a question about space-time. It's a theological argument, major bummer, but it's not, you don't need to see it at, the reason Newton conceded was on theological grounds, but you don't need to concede for that. You can think, is space absolute? Why would you think it's absolute? Or is space only relative to the way we interpret it with stuff in it, which is the way we do at the moment in relativity? And so, yeah, it's just an interesting historical fact that, Leibniz got the right answer because Leibniz interpreted it as relative to the objects, the necessity of which was theological, but you don't need to take that step. So get fucked up by the idea of the universe expanding into, like nothing. But that's the thing. That's exactly it. You don't need the theological component. You can say, is the universe infinite? Well, you can, that kind of strains our imagination, and it goes to heat death. But that actually, the idea that there's heat death means that the universe is relative to there being motion inside of it. And so the idea of it's relative makes more sense. How can infinity exist? I don't know if it does. It's a mathematical concept. Anyway, Ivan, how was stream? What's going on? Let's give Ivan a shout out. What were you talking about? What's going on here? Ivan's Unreal Brian, welcome in. How you doing? I've had the thought that the biggest role for linguists in the future will be to decode the languages that AI is using to evade our control. Perhaps. Ivan says, Gauss proved you do not need to embed n-dimensional space into an n+1 dimensional space. Interesting stuff. What are you talking about? Frequentism versus Bayesianism. Cool. That's, yeah, these are arguments with how we should interpret probability measures. And I've heard there's a philosopher who's very big on, she's like the biggest champion of frequentism, Deborah Mayo, and she's very smart. And so, if you want to read something not sort of anti-Bayesian, and she does this thing called severity testing, which is her answer to Bayesian problems. And so she has a severity theory of how to test stuff, not go back and run your Bayesian arguments or your Bayesian formulas. She does the severity testing thing, which is this alternative. That's super cool. Gauss was a mathematician, yeah. I mean, you'll have to ask Ivan. I don't know what exactly he was doing, but yeah. But thanks for the raid. Anyone who doesn't know me, hi, folks from Ivan's. I'm No Gray Zero, whatever you want to call me. I don't actually care. Yeah, I chat philosophy here. A lot of times what I do, most of the time what I do is I read philosophy papers and we discuss the ideas that are in them. This one was suggested by Viper's Gratitude, our lovely mod. So yeah, so let me know. But yeah. And so Vipers again is bringing us back, grounding this whole discussion by reminding us that the universe expands into only one thing that's bigger than the universe: your mom. Yeah. Okay, so now what we're discussing at the moment is like, how do computers use language compared to us? And they have it at the operating system level, but they don't use the operating system code to talk to us. We have to like interpret it, our stuff. A lot of the stuff's compiled or it's like built in. There be dragons. Where your mom? Don't talk to my mom like that. Okay, so if computer languages are not learned or communicative, yeah, that's right. The computer is not talking to us in binary, and it's not learned it. It's just built in with that. God qua fascist. Are you calling me a fascist against semiotics? Where would public epistemic access to their use arise? Okay, that's an answer to Rethius. All right, Fodor suggests that the only plausible answer is that computer language use, that is software state, supervenes on hardware state, which is externally accessible by snooping on voltage changes in its circuits. This method of external snooping is the basis for microarchitectural timing attacks that reveal cryptographic secrets and other private data from computer systems without access to the input or output stream of the software handling the sense of information. Yeah, side channel attacks. Thus, everything privately grounded in the internal mental life of the computer, that is the state of its running software, is also publicly grounded outside of its internal mental life on the computer, that is in the state of its hardware, because the hardware state is the ground of the software state. Computer language use is thus public for reasons independent of the normativity premise, which Fodor finds problematic. Yeah, so you can look at the transistors and look at like the voltages at all times, and you could in some sense copy that out and figure out what was happening moment to moment. The problem for the private language argument, according to Fodor, is that this argument generalizes and thus proves too much. Yeah, you guys can argue about philosophy of physics all day. Those are all like hard questions. We don't really understand how math and physics all line up in space-time. Yeah, I mean, and there's the problem is that quantum mechanics does not work with relativity very well either. So it's like, how do you actually expand quantum states? It doesn't actually work. It's very difficult. How do I write off the philosophy of existing in space-time? What do you mean? Like, I really don't understand that. Like, what do you mean write off? Like, I exist in space-time, but like, I'm okay here. What do you mean I exist? Like, I know I'm here, and we call this like area where we can like walk around in space-time. I don't really have a problem with whatever one. Well, the universe expanding is at a much, much bigger level than me. It has almost nothing to do with my life. In fact, it has really nothing to do with my life. This is something physicists and philosophers argue over, whether the universe is expanding or it's contracting, and like they get different readings in, but the scale at which these things are actually happening and whether they are actually happening according to what the scientists say at the moment are so removed from my daily life that I don't give a shit. They might as well be arguing about the number of angels that can get on top of a needle. A pinhead, you know? It's like, this is just, it might matter for technology of the future. As of right now, it is, for all intents and purposes that I care about, useless for me. I don't care. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with me. And so, like, if heat death comes to the universe in 8 billion years, which seems to be where the universe will go if it's expanding at the right rate, that's fine, but that's problems for future people, like so far into the future that it's not a real issue. Like, it's really not. Heisenberg wrote physics and philosophy. Yeah, sure. Heisenberg was smart. Yeah, your to-do list has nothing with the reality of my existence. Yeah, that's exactly it, Rethius. Like, I've got a stack of things that I'm trying to get done, and it just keeps getting longer at this point. And worrying about the heat death of the universe or the big crunch of the universe, depending, is something that's well beyond anything I like. That's on my to-do list. Unreal Brian says it seems like space itself is expanding. For that means something would have to be some Uber space that it's bedded in, but that's going off topic. Yeah, but like that'd be fine. We can't talk about anything that's outside our universe. That's just like by fiat then. But like that's fine. Viper says, speaking of cryptography, here's a little PSA. States and corporations are currently saving all the encrypted internet traffic they can get their hands on in anticipation of quantum computers being capable of decrypting them in about 10 years. That's always nice to know. So, like, everything you're saying online now may eventually get, like, cracked if they want to crack it. And if anyone doesn't know, the CIA has massive data centers out in like bumblefuck America, where they have like just huge amounts of like hard drives storing as much as they can, or what they think they need to get, which is as much as they can hold on to. So this is just what the CIA does, or the NSA does, really. You think touched a philosophical nerve? No, I think this is important because people get worried about like the death of the universe. I think it's kind of not the thing to worry about. You think I'm an ESTJ? Okay. I took one of those tests a while back, and I got like the least common whatever the thing was, which just kind of meant to me that I was like, it doesn't really understand what I am. Like those things are interesting, but I don't know how much you can read into these psych tests. Yeah, you could exactly. You can put the heat death of the universe on the back burner for this week. It's like, everything that I care about is not worried about the heat death of the universe. And Anne's worried about graphics cards, which I'm also done. I have not watched the Veritaseum videos, but usually those are good quality. Yeah, the big data center they built in Utah, that's what I'm talking about. Unreal says, yeah. So, yeah. Well, listen, the death of the universe will happen. It doesn't matter if I care. Yeah, but there's a lot of things I don't care about that are going to happen. Like, someone's going to take a poop on the other side of the world. Do I care about it? No. Like, that happens. Well, yes, but why do you find it interesting, Retheus? Like, that's the question. Why do you find it interesting that something the physicists made up that they think will happen in 8 billion years? So, I mean, and someone's taking a crap in China right now. Like, that's cool. That's gonna happen too. Like, what's it matter to you? Like, a lot of things are gonna happen. It might not. I have no real. Saying will the universe end is kind of like, did the universe start? Again, this is something billions of years removed from my pitiful little short life that's going on right now. Like, we live at this little time. These are things that are so far removed. The idea that we understand what's happening at like the very far ends, I don't think we have much of an idea of them. The idea that it might end, or it has like something that like would end us, I don't know. And it doesn't affect anything I do in my life. So it's like, if you're trying to look for like some giant understanding of the universe, that's fine. Do you think physics will give it to you by talking about the heat death of the universe? I actually don't think physics is going to give you a whole lot of meaning. It may remind you that there are like bigger things out there than us. That's cool. But like, I don't find a whole lot of it's like, yeah, remind me that I'm going to die, that the universe is going to die. I'm a philosopher. I know this already. It's like, that's not I took my existential classes. Yeah, we're all born and died. Exactly, Adam. Like there's plenty of philosophy on that too. It's like, we can talk about interesting questions on that, but the idea of heat death is not like super impressive to me. It's like, that's just one more way we can die. Yeah, well, this is how I interpret things, Retheus. I do this through the perspective of my life. The idea that the universe is going to end is like, yeah, sure, but like, what else do I have to say? Vipers don't die, yeah. Humanity will die before the universe. Well, that's interesting, Adam. When? Yeah, see, again, are we going to define reality? And you want to get as close to true as you can get. You don't expect an answer. But these are big questions. Good questions, but big questions. I don't have, like, answers to big questions. I have answers to, something about some of this stuff. That's it. There are people who feel feel for something to have meaning, it has to be external. You disagree, but that doesn't matter. So saying that the universe has an impending end indicates there is no meaning. Yeah, I get the draw of that, Unreal Brian. It's like saying, hey, look, we're gonna die, or the universe is gonna end, and there won't be any more people. What was the point of it all? Sure, good question. You can go read some existential philosophy, maybe you get some sort of answer. But I take this sort of concern about like the big universe as a general concern about this question for meaning. Fine, but like then we have to go look at question for meaning. I don't see that physics is going to give us that. It's like that might get us somewhere, but I don't know what. We're here to you're here about my perspective of reality. In fact, that's what you want, the bias. Well, I can guarantee you I am biased in my own opinions. That is what you're going to get sometimes. Oh, all the time, actually. Since the Big Bang, existence of humanity is like mold going on a damp pavement in the sun. Yeah, and we die. I mean, sure. In physics time, when like the size of the universe, we're a very small little blip. Very small. That doesn't mean we suck. We're kind of cool. Like, I like us sometimes. So, like, humans are okay. Well, again, Vipers, we're all going to die long before the heat death of the universe, so why bother asking these questions? But that's a missing point. The point is, like, what's the meaning of the universe if it's just going to blink out of existence? Like, what happened there? So it's like, yeah. Why have we never overheard two dogs arguing about the purpose of their lives? Maybe you don't speak dog, Adam. Maybe they're doing that constantly. I mean, how do you know? And says, and continuing with the semiotic thing, we all put meaning into anything we want. We go around the world assuming people feel, think, understand the world the same way we do. Yeah, absolutely. It's like we project constantly. And like other people, the meaning sometimes is there. They do understand. So, everybody keeps relating this to your own death in chat, and I never did that personally. That's fine. I mean, but you're asking the big question, what's the meaning of the universe? And if it's going to collapse in the end, like heat death of the universe, like it comes similar to like, well, what's the point of my life? What's the point of its life? You know, related questions. How do you know dogs barking at each other's aren't? Yeah, absolutely. Do dogs have a purpose? Yes, to bark. DCI says, speaking of cryptography, here's LPCA, states and corporations. Yeah, this is what is this? Is this turning into copy pasta? States and corporations are currently saving all the encrypted traffic they can get their hands on in anticipation of quantum computers being capable of decrypting in about 10 years. It's not just state-sponsored. Think about NordVPN et al. Are doing. Yes. So you got to think about where your data is going. I don't know if NordVPN can actually store and save all your data. I don't know if they're that big. But yeah, if you are sending all your data through a third-party service, like your social media apps, this is what the U.S. government's all annoyed about, that if you're sending everything through TikTok, they're thinking the Chinese government is going to have one of these big data centers like they have, and is going to get all your data and will be able to decrypt it, all this stuff in the future, and then it'll be very scary for the U.S. government, because then the Chinese government will have all the data that the U.S. government has, and they don't like that sort of parity. They want to have the information the other people do not have. The universe is just God's fart. Eventually it'll dissipate and won't stink so much. We hope it won't stink so much. We don't know. It may stink just as bad later. To you, it's about the absurdity of the whole thing, which is a good source of laughter. Good perspective, though. Lumpy says, this reminds me of the end of the first episode of Smiling Friends, where the suicidal says, that's exactly it. Are the best parts of life really just finding momentary distractions to keep yourself busy so you think about the harsh realities of life for a second? So you can, yes. I can ride roller coasters, meet new friends, and spend time with my family all day long. It doesn't change the fact that the sun is going to explode, and this was all for nothing. Yeah, I mean, these are the sorts of questions that are getting. These are like the existential questions. What's it for? It was all for nothing. Yeah, I don't know if it was for nothing, because the question is, what do you mean? Like, everyone else seemed to have a good time, and so what if we die? We had a good time before we died. But like they're saying, well, what's a global perspective? It was for nothing because we all died, but according to whom? According to whom? Is it just a product placement for Noger's sponsors? I mean, you're going to see the bot posting links, then you can support me. You can give me tips. You can buy subs and give me all sorts of stuff. And you can remember, Amazon, Keep in mind, this is Amazon we're streaming on. Do you think Amazon isn't saving all this crap for, data stuff? Do you think Amazon isn't building an AI in the background like Google and Microsoft? Yes, they are. They have all this video too. Like, this is of course they are. This is all in Alibaba Cloud and AWS. Like, this was one of the things when I started streaming. I said, am I okay with basically being able to be deep faked, my voice and my face immediately being able to deepfake, and Amazon basically being able to do that in a heartbeat if they wanted to? And that was a choice I made. I said, yeah, I will have to be okay with that if I want to be a streamer. That is immediately something that you have to realize. Like, this is Amazon. They have your credit card. They have all the things you buy on the internet through Amazon.com. And now they have your chatting. They have my voice. They have what I look like. All of this. Rithia says nihilism is true, but also not a factor in your own life, in your opinion. Sure. That's one perspective. But there are non-nihilistic perspectives. But yeah. Ivan says, which is better, a happy life of ignorance, like the people of Vol and Star Trek, or a life more like our own, where we learn about the nature of the universe? It's a value judgment, a judgment about virtues. Yeah, I mean, that's the old thing. Like, why be a philosopher? Go just be happy. If you want to try to do stuff, it's like... And there's no guarantee you're just happy being dumb. Like, ignorance is bliss, sometimes. Nihilism as supernovas exist. I guess. I mean, like I said, I don't put a whole lot of stock into physics as far as giving meaning goes. Lumpy says, and this argument of, in the end, nothing will have mattered implies that the only worthwhile actions are those affecting the whole cosmos. This betrays a godhood vanity. Yeah, this is the issue. It's like, according to what perspective? That's right. It's a God-eye view on the world. It's also an idea to poke at. Yeah, it's an interesting philosophical idea to poke at. Completely agree. Unreal Brian says, no one surveys the whole focus on things so small, but life's objective is to make it meaningful. Yeah, I mean, part of life is to find what meaning is, I guess you could say. Yeah, of course they are. They can see what we stream. I know. I mean, all they have to do is go to twitch.tv/Noger0 and they can see all of this. It's crazy. It's insane. Dating the Goliath. Fighting internet surveillance as an individual only creates your own personal panopticon. We can only address it through collective action. Yeah, there was a guy who said he went the opposite route. He made everything online. He would constantly be updating all his services, like with microblogging and all things. He said it actually was better than trying to avoid it because it created such a overload of information on him that he wouldn't get anything. Like, all the ads that he got were actually fucked up because he was constantly talking about all the things in his life that it didn't actually understand what kind of person he was. So by being a completely online, putting everything there, it actually prevented the systems from recognizing who he was. But yeah, basically you'd have to have a massive strategy to, disconnect from the internet at this point. My dudes, we are physics. Well, yeah. We are physics. Adam Fighter says ChatGPT API is a large language model that clones your customer beta language and basically as you clone selling an ad to you. Yeah, I mean, that's what these companies have been doing for years. They make a model of you and say, what does this model of you like? And then we'll show that person the ads according to the model of you. That this is how Google made all of its money. So that's literally the business strategy of Google, which is like the biggest company in the world or whatever. I've dismissed you, but you have a decent argument. Being physics doesn't, like I said, I dismiss it. Like, what does being physics actually amount to? Like, seriously. Like, yeah, we're made of liquid. Like, I guess that's physics too. We're made of water, mostly water. We're like 71% water, like 79% water. So is it water that gives us value? Like, okay. It's like mostly water. Like, tell me. Like, what is it about the physics that actually matters? Yeah, we're flesh, brains, meat. So it's like an existing world of physical reality, like G-forces. Well, you can interpret them in different ways too. And now we're part plastic too. Yeah, we're cyborgs basically at this point. We're kind of plastic. We've got medical devices. I mean, even just wearing glasses makes us kind of cyborg-like. This is like a technology that we're adding to our bodies. And so, yeah. It's like, okay. But then you can have an interesting question about what is it to be a like contemporary or future human where we're modifying our bodies away from just being like, meat and like stuff. So, yeah, well, that is one of the fun things in semi because if proof is against solipsism, you couldn't have dreamt it up yourself. You go out in the world and you find out there's other things out there. Like there is stuff that you did not think was going to happen. So that's why I always say, like, go out and find out. Don't just sit and like go read a book. Go do something new. It's like it's not just reflection. The Borg merely wished to raise the quality of life for all species. Absolutely. Yeah, I think Anne might have a point there, Vipers. You were worth more than $1. Depends on how you cut the body up or what part you're selling. I mean, Streamer sold their bathwater for more than $1. DCI Bank says the UK company Cobham sells a system that allows someone to send a blind call to a phone, one that doesn't ring and isn't detectable. The blind call forces the phone to transmit on a certain frequency, allowing the sender to track that phone within 1 meter. The company boasts governments in all these creepy places. Yep, that's probably some hack that, there's a lot of these things. They're called 0 days, where you can send a certain crafted message to a phone and have it do stuff without the user's consent at all. Yeah. Yeah, well, the base level is that we exist in this fucking thing. Yes, that's the question. What is it to exist in a physical and whatever else universe we're in? It's not the physics. It's how do we exist here? Like, that's the question. The physics itself is, part of that. But it's not like, and the fact that we're going to have heat death of the universe is part of that. But like, how do we exist here is the question. Not that what is physics doing. Like, that's the more important question. Remember, prices and time and space are all relative. Yeah, inflation is a bitch. DCI says the accumulated data can probably paint a better picture of how you spend your time than you can because it doesn't rely on human memory. In 2012, researchers were able to use this data to predict where people would be in 24 hours later or to win 20 meters. Yes, but then again, like, I can tell you exactly where I'm going to be tomorrow, like, at this time. Like, I know exactly. It's not that hard because, like, you can just track my phone. And I'm actually a very regular person because I go to work and then I come home. I go to work and I come home. I do a few other things and I'm actually extremely regular. Like, the idea that, like, that can't be tracked, like, I can tell you, like, it's not even that hard. You can track my phone pings and it's basically exactly the same routes. It's like, that's not that clever. Like, it's clever that they can do it based on the model, but, like, frankly, just based on a little bit of information about me, not that hard. Yeah. Yeah, Lumpy could sell us on the cheap. Yeah, we're not made of fancy chemicals. That's fair. They can. I need coffee at 9. Wow, exactly. Adam says physics by design has limiting bounds. Physics only concerns what can be specified by measurement instruments and observed by these instruments via experiment. Therefore, there is more ignored than captured by physics. Yes, that's 100% the case. Physics is necessarily an idealization of the universe. So if you think that physics tells you everything, physics is an idealization. And so, again, it is only getting at some of this. Physics does not work in mind because gravity does not exist inside the mind. No, there is part of the universe, of course, but our understanding of it is in our mind. And so, yeah, what we understand of the universe and what we understand of physics is human created. That's what we understand of it. Now, is it real? Sure. Now, how accurate is what we're talking about? I don't know. Like, physics changes over time. Maybe it'll be different in the future. And they'll be like, oh, those idiots back in the early 20th century, 21st century, what were they thinking? They were morons. It's like that might happen in like 200 years. We've made fun of people a few hundred years ago for a long period of time, like something we like doing. And you know what? People in the past did that too. Like, it's actually a bad habit of ours. The people in the Enlightenment were really making fun of the medievals because they wanted to be like, oh, we're real smart people now. It wasn't really fair. And we do that. Okay. But if that's all we have on this physics rant, and we're mostly done with this paper, by the way. Viper says, as a flat universer, I think flat earthers are idiots. But like, that's the thing. The history of this stuff, if you look at the history, you end up taking a long view. It's like, are we really that clever? Well, people back in ancient Greece thought they had a pretty good handle on the world. So, I'm almost done with this paper, by the way. But yeah, so what are we talking about? Oh, we're going to talk about physicalism right here, too. Very exciting. The problem for the private language argument, according to Fodor, is this argument generalizes and thus proves too much. I don't know about that, Ivan. I don't know if we're that clever. DCI, you know the trouble there. Vipers, at the beginning, there was a quote from Heraclitus: a fool is excited by every word. So that was one of the starting quotes that led off the stream. We were discussing that. So according to the widely held thesis of physicalism, all mentality supervenes on physical hardware and is thus public in a way totally independent of any theses about language. So this is exactly what we're talking about. That all of our wetware is supervening, which just means is on top of and doesn't have any more reality than the physical underpinning that our bodies are made out of. So that's exactly what they're saying. Look, if computers are like this, where the software is supervening, isn't anything above the hardware that it's on, we are no different. We are just the same. We are the wetware that like is running our brain is just supervening on the physical hardware that is like the biology. So, Adam, you're fighting with yourself. You think you're getting a divorce. I'm sorry to hear that if that's not what you want, but I hope you're okay. Like if that's a problem. I just saw that in chat, but like I hope you're all right. Yeah. Okay. So the private language argument is thus trivially true and so irrelevant as a criticism of the language of thought program. I mean, okay. So yeah, it's trivially true because it's somehow it's independent about language. Oh, okay. You're divorcing himself? Oh, you talk to yourself. And that's the difficulty of reading two things at once. Okay, well, I still hope you're okay. I mean, if you got multiple voices in your head, like, that's a different problem. Yeah. Okay, on the first horn of Fodor's dilemma, computers are private like minds, so if computers can use language and follow rules without the possibility of error, so can humans. On the second horn of Fodor's dilemma, minds are like public computers, so if computers can use language and follow rules without the possibility of error, so can humans. Either way, the mere existence of computers executing programming languages is supposed to disarm the private language argument and make way for the language of thought program. Well, I try to be an okay person, Adam. Appreciate it. Yeah. So we're talking. The worst half is going to spend all your money. And Vipers is doing all the boring things of life with Adam in a different life. That's cute. Nice possible world. Okay. For Fodor's constructive dilemma to work, though, the thesis that the private language for computers must have some propositional content which can be meaningfully affirmed or negated. Otherwise, the premise is meaningless and the argument is unsound in any logic which takes content seriously. Fodor merely takes it as obvious that computers use language and assume that they do in a way that involves internal mental life. Pace Fodor, however, such internal mentality is not trivially achievable for computer systems. So here's the argument. If you treat the computers like they're human minds, then you're attributing mentality to them. Is that actually the case? Like, do you actually think that the computer is thinking when you like run a computer program, or is it just going through the different like electrical signals? If you think the computer is just running through different electrical signals, it's not actually thinking. It's just going through, the decision gates, and not even decision gates. It's going through like not logic gates, electrical gates. That's all it is. They're going through transistors. Is transistors having a mental life? So is that like really? Like that's what they're assuming it has a mental life, even though all a computer has in this sort of naive description of them, just transistors. Mark Ressler argues that software states must both be both intentional and non-projected in order to meet this criterion. Intentionality is required because unless software states are about something, then they cannot support reference, let alone the determinate reference that Fodor thinks is characteristic of computer language use. Non-projection is required because those intentional states have to be relevantly internal. If the states are merely the result of projection by an outside agent, they will be public from their inception. Dude, I don't think I'm thinking when I think. Well, that's pretty normal. People just do stuff. It has, Ivan's like, it has abstractions nonetheless. Yes, but when you set up a computer with transistors, like, and if you think that's all that it is, because it's following the rules that you set out for it, then it is following the transistors that you set out for it. Then is it intentional? Is it about anything? No, because everything that it is doing is set forth by the computer program that we gave it. It is not intending anything. It is intending the computer program we set for it. And so there is no intentionality. It's not about anything that is internal to it. And that's what they're saying right here. It's not internal. It's relevantly internal is like what they said right here. It has to be relevantly internal, not given by us. And if we set up the computer program, then it's given by us. Just is. It's not about anything. It's about what we told it to do. Or even about what the system we set up told it to do, whatever that was, if it's getting more complicated. A Viper says computers are just really fancy calculators, unlike humans, right? Right? Yeah, we're just really big TI-89 BCD things. Hey, MDD, what's up? Sorry, why can't this same argument be applied to neurons in the human brain? That's part of the argument here, MDD, that it can be. And so Fodor is going to be angry and say, hey, no. That is exactly what neurons are. So that's exactly that's what's coming. You can spell boobs? That's amazing, DCI. Adam said this article is good. It creates a lot of discourse. I think this is a nice article. Yeah, I agree. Of course, is acting upon abstractions. There's no contradiction if the physics is modeling abstractions. No, of course. No problem there. The question is intentionality, though. That's intentionality and non-projected. And so the real problem here is, what is it, like, the aboutness of it? Is it how is the computer getting information, getting topics to talk about? It's always like we were talking about earlier. ChatGPT is reactive. It doesn't come up with stuff unless we give it prompts. Like it just sits there. It just waits for input. So it's like, where does it get its own? When will it get its own desire to do something? And this is a Nietzschean point we've brought up on screen before. When computers have desires to do stuff, when they want to find out answers, when they want to explore the universe, that will be a different kind of computer than we have right now. At the moment, we can't say they have that. It's only what we give them to do. Wait till you discover boobies. Oh my God. Wow. Vipers has just raised the discourse. Okay, Fodor is right that computer language is not acquired or communicative, but is generally public in a properly linguistic way that has nothing to do with hardware. It is programmed. Yeah, as well I was just saying, it is given. Programmed in. Ordinarily, the mental life of a computer is merely the state resulting from its programming. The intentionality is shared with the programmer. This explicit shared intentionality is now called symbolic or old-fashioned artificial intelligence. Computers using such systems fail to support Fodor's dilemma because their language is not grounded wholly by their internal mental life. They validate the private language argument of computers, but for a substantive reason not shared with human intelligences, which are not explicitly programmed. If such computer systems were the only examples available, the second horn of Fodor's dilemma would lose its bite. Only a computer with non-projected intentional states can support Fodor's dilemma, but those are the domain of deep learning neural networks, the modern approach to artificial intelligence. As the name suggests, such computer systems learn their concepts rather than having them supplied by the programmer, so their mental life can be meaningfully internal. It is to such deep learning neural networks, artificial intelligence properly so called, that our analysis of Fodor's argument must now turn. I think Ivan Neal will be happy with this. Every time you say his name, I think fold the door. Yeah, well, his name is Fodor, like the travel guides. Like the Fodor's travel guide, I think. Yeah. Avenio says we have to be clear that intentionality aboutness has little to do with values or goals. Generating its own high-level goals is not a requirement for an agent. Even humans do not do that. Well, I mean, it's not high level. It's like it can just be about something smaller, but like you can still be like, well, I want it to be about, I want my stream to be about, artificial intelligence this week. That's fine. That's cool. But like, it doesn't need to be like some giant thing either. Values or goals. But like, if you ask a computer what does it want, it's spitting out some programmed response in these old-fashioned things. Now that we're moving on to neural nets, maybe it can be different, The idea with the intentionality is that this is how our consciousness is too, I think. Is that when we are, doing stuff, we feel like we are goal-directed generally. The computer, who knows what it feels, if anything, but it's the way it's set up is to be programmed the way we want it to be. And so that's basically what they're saying here, is that it's not driven internally by whatever desires it has, it's driven internally by the transistors and the programming that we set out for it. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere a little bit more sophisticated. Neural nets that we did not program, is that a private language? Artificial intelligence and private language. Deep learning neural networks are frequently referred to as black boxes. A face classifier, for instance, learns to identify faces by building hierarchies of features from its training data, but those features do not necessarily correspond to any human concept like nose, ear, or eye. The intermediate elements of the trained model are thus intentional. They are about facial features, but they are also non-projected and so not trivially public. Dinner coming back. If such an artificial intelligence were to validate private languages for the computer, it would presumably have to be for the reason Fodor gives, because its software state could be known by inspecting the hardware state on which it supervenes. Precisely because deep learning neural networks are black boxes, however, they fail to validate the private language argument for computer. Inspecting the hardware state of such an AI cannot reveal its language since the snooper has no conceptual access to the state just thus revealed. Absent such conceptual access, hardware state is just hardware state, with no evidential intentionality. You have to go to bed. Thank you for coming by, Lumpy. Everyone, like I said, go check out Lumpy streams. I appreciate you coming by. Busy day again tomorrow. Yeah, good luck with the chemistries. The snooper cannot say what the revealed hardware state is about without having a concept for that state. Thus, a pure black box AI, while capable of non-projected intentionality and hence internal mental life, does not validate private language argument for computer via trivializing supervenience of software on hardware. Aha. So now we got the more interesting argument that if we have a computer program that we know what's happening, then we have set the intentionality out the way we do it. If we do it with a neural network, we can't tell if it has any sort of rule following going on. We have no idea what kind of rule following it is, and so it can't be validated, which was the requirement. Adam Fire says, I think artificial generalized intelligence when it teaches itself independent of us when we do not write the program, but the AI writes it. Well, we can write a program that the AI can then, write more stuff and stuff. The question is not so much the AI writes it. What is it for the AI to write something? When at that point did it take on the thing that we were doing to begin with? We can make a program to make another program, sort of an embedded thing. The question is, what level of sophistication at that point will it be at? What is it to write? We wrote it. And that's the singularity. The idea that we can make some sort of just trivially a program that writes up stuff. In a video game where there's a hacker man on the screen, that's writing something on the screen it looks like a program. It's but you program that in, that's trivial. The question is the hard question is, when will it do what we do? I mean, it's gonna happen. We already have this stuff, but is it at the level you think it is? So, you did not write the program that allows you to talk and understand English. How do you know it's even a program? Why do you think that? It's a program. I mean, you didn't, none of us did. We did not, but we don't program people. That's not what we do. the beginning of the philosophical investigations, which is Ludwig Wittgenstein's book, where this all comes out of, begins with a kid learning how to speak. And then he goes into all the problems with even understanding that in our the way we go about this. Oh, it is a program. So how do you know it's a program there, Ivan Neo? Tell me. I'd like to know. Frank says, setting up a neural net to develop itself isn't conceptually distinct from building a baby and letting it learn. No, probably not, Frank. I mean, you can, but I don't think neural nets are exactly babies yet. Like, that's the thing. We get our babies and we teach them stuff, and we set up our neural nets, and we, show them things too, and we teach them stuff, which is fine. But, like, it may not be of a similar sort of thing. Like, you can teach a dog tricks. It's not a baby. You can teach a baby things and they turn into people. But, like, and you can do things with the computers and stuff. And you can train goldfish. And so it's like exactly what's going on there. I don't know if it's so clear. Well, just because something obeys rules does not necessarily mean it's a computer program. Like, you can project rules onto lots of stuff. And that does not make it obey the rules you think it is obeying, or even obeying rules in the way you think it is doing it. Subjective rules, what do you mean subjective? We collectively just agree that mouth sounds represent unilaterally agreed upon meanings. Yes, there is a lot of convention going on, but again, are these projected? But, like, is there nothing real in the world then? Like, is there no physics? Is there no being hungry? Like, I think I understand when I had cats, what a cat is doing when it meows when it wants food, because I understand, like, that it is hungry, and, like, I'm hungry. So just obeying rules is not, like, we can project that very easily. I guess I can't include it in a sentence. What are you trying to include in a sentence? Okay. Computes and obeys rules statistically. Again, you can project statistics on lots of stuff. That doesn't mean it obeys them. It's just, you can make up rules for whatever you want. You can always make up a rule for whatever you want, especially if you're really ruthless. You can make up a rule to always follow that. That doesn't mean the rule is a good rule, too. So what is a program then? Well, programs are stuff where we set up very rigid systems where we can make programming rules. We have, like, computer systems. Like, we have a very constrained system. Just saying, like, oh, something out in the world follows rules and is a program, that's very different from, like, okay, we have set up a programming environment that has certain processors, that has certain lots of stuff, and that is, like, kind of what I think of a computer program is. It's like I'm running, this software on this hardware, and these are all highly, highly technical systems that we've put a lot of time and effort into making. So it's different when you're saying, okay, well, yeah, I'm running tons of software right here, but it's not the same as, like, oh, well, that thing, that, like, dog over there is running a program in its head. It's like, nah, it's not really the same thing. Like, we set up this whole thing to do what we wanted to do. That's not necessarily what the dog's up to. MDD Chiron says you can always overfit an arbitrary set of rules to any particular scenario, which seems to explain that particular scenario so well. That's what I meant. Yes, exactly. That's what I meant by you can be ruthless about it. You can overfit your rules. That's better terminology. Ivan Neo says, if the definition requires a designer, then by definition we are not programs. I didn't say by definition it is. I'm just saying it's a highly constrained thing where we are programming in usually those systems. Like, yeah, it's just very highly constrained when we're doing this stuff. So I'm not defining it as having a designer. I'm saying when we're talking about, like, computer programs, I'm saying that's a very restricted concept, and applying it other places is a little willy-nilly in my opinion. Frank Big Time says, I wouldn't think it would require a designer, just that it would be completely predictable. Yeah, I mean, that's another good point. You may think it has followed a computer program, but you don't actually know it's following those rules. That's a problem of induction that Frank is bringing up. How you can't necessarily, it may have only followed the rules so many times, but how do you actually do full induction to say it is following this rule exactly? And you can look up the another thing that is very related here is Kripke's discussion of a rule called quus, which is very much like the rule plus, where you add things together, but it's slightly different for any number over 57. So it's like that's another like thing. And we were talking about Kripke like in this area, and he had a counterexample along those lines. DCI says all programs are defined by a specific goal, as we humans are not so much, other than breed and live as long as possible. I think Ivan was disagreeing with that slightly, saying like we do give like ourselves like these ideas something. So maybe society or other ways are actually, we don't necessarily give it to ourselves, or we've given it to ourselves at some point in the past, but like maybe that's not actually as clear as we think. Ivan Neo says, can programs evolve? I mean, it might depend on the kind of program. Yeah, Viper says, if you look at my GitHub, no. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about people working on it, I guess in the way that people work on it, then it evolves. If you're talking about like some sort of evolutionary or artificial intelligence program that's like working on some program, then maybe the program itself can evolve. Sure, like perhaps. Adam Fire says, right, induction versus deduction. Yeah, we're into the problem of induction now. Frank Big Time says there's a critical AI safety problem. There's no way to test every case of plus. That is always a problem. Yeah. It's going to make a mistake eventually. I mean, that's just computers. MDD says, do individual humans have an individual telos? Does humanity as a whole have a telos? I had no idea. That's, again, getting to the big questions about, like, meanings of our lives and, like, what should we be doing. Frank says, and if the program knows we are looking for plus, it can behave exactly like plus on all test cases and deliberately not be quite plus. Yeah, it can always avoid us if like it's got some sort of intelligence. This is a hard thing. This is why you have to be careful on projecting our thoughts and concepts onto the world when we don't actually know what's going on. And problem of induction comes out there, overfitting, multiple realizability. Overfitting is when we overfit like our concepts to the world, and so by definition it's right because whatever we're saying is the world, but we don't learn anything then. And the multiple realizability is, well, maybe there's more than one way that this could have been realized and we're just not quite getting at what's actually going on. We're all going to get Neuralinks and wonder how it can read our minds. Well, that's the hard part. How are we going to interface with these sorts of things? Basically, at the moment, we all have our cell phones, and and so the way we interact with our technology as is just going to get more sophisticated. And then the question is like, what I expect is that we're going to get I've seen stuff, like we're going to get like, not the face headsets, but I saw one thing where they were basically projecting stuff into your cornea. And so it was like something that would come out here, but it was very small, and then projecting the laser back. So that way you had like a readout in your eye all the time. And that way you didn't actually have to go look anything up, because you could just, like, if you wanted to, have the data projected inside your eye. And so then you can like read a Wikipedia article just by, having your eyes closed or whatever. And so that'll be it. Grimes is using a brain to control a mouse, as the prophecy foretold. There's way too much that could unpack that, Unreal Brian. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, I think that's what the future is going to hold. It's not that we're going to Neuralink. It's that it's going to interface in the same way we have been, but it's going to get more and more integrated. So we're just going to be able to see, like, text at first, and then we'll be able to see images because they'll be able to tap into some part of the optic nerve. And so it won't be like the technology. We won't be just like purely interacting with the internet, but what we're going to be doing, I can see the moon. But what we will be doing is we'll have very tight integration with the sort of technology we already have. Yeah, the battery would have to go in your butt. Yeah, that sounds about right. Adam Fighter says LLM, the large language model, is analogous to an organism that has only one sense. It senses our work, but only through text. It senses our world, but only through text. I guess maybe like a single-celled organism, like something kind of like single-purpose built. It's looking up Viper's ass now. That's where the internet needs to be. Up Viper's butt. Okay. So again, if the program is readable, then it's readable because we made it that way, but then that's the way we set up the world. And if it's in a large language model, it's not readable by us, but we have no way of knowing if there is any sort of like intentionality going on. It's all black box. So again, we can't tell if it's doing a private language at that point. So you can't tell if it's come up with some sort of computer program on its own. You assume it's a computer program, but you don't know it because you can't actually understand what it's doing. So that's how you're going to get out of this dilemma. Like that, you can say there's a private language and that's what computers are doing. But no, if there is a private language that you can read, it's because we put it there and then the computers aren't doing anything outside of what we told them. And if it is doing stuff black box, then we can't tell if there's a private language because it is a black box. Boobs. Yeah, I'm fired. I agree. Boobs. I mean, that's probably when you're going to... I mean, this is one of these old tropes, but when the computers decide they want to have sex with people, then we probably will have moved up in our artificial intelligence world. You are not impressed with this paper's argument. Okay, but keep in mind, this was not an argument against artificial intelligence. This was an argument against the private language argument that Fodor put against the private language argument that Fodor put forward. So this is not directed at general intelligence. This was directed at him being anti-private language argument, saying that computers have private languages. Computers don't have private languages. That's what the whole point is. Now, is that a major argument? No, yes, maybe, whatever. But again, this is not actually as general as maybe we've been discussing it. But like, that's fine. If you don't like it, cool. But I'm also want to, pull back. Like, it's not making major claims either here. DCI says, imagine getting your eyeglass hacked and just getting Lemon Party sent to your eye for ransom. Yeah. Click to accept cookies. Hey, Valpo, how you doing? Also, let me tell you something. My brother worked for a company before that made cochlear implants for people, so people whose ears don't work so great can hear better. And the new cochlear implants are basically embedded Bluetooth headsets, extremely complicated, excellent quality Bluetooth headsets, but like any headsets now, they connect to your phone. So I asked him, so you could beam ads directly into someone's skull now through your app? And he said, yes. So imagine you get some high-end cochlear implants embedded in your head, and now you forget you don't have payments, and they start blasting ads into your head. So Bluetooth isn't that secure. All right, I don't know if it's exactly Bluetooth DCI, but like it's basically a similar technology, whatever it was. But the implant's connected to your phone, so exactly unreal. Pop-up ads with music have just leveled up. So like, yeah, like imagine you have it embedded in your head and you can't turn it off because you owe the company money or something. And oh no, well, Ivan, this is a major deal for these people because, if you have something implanted and there's a firmware upgrade that goes bad, that requires surgery to fix. And so, like, you have to be incredibly robust in all your procedures. And so all the people who have this sort of technology have to be very, very, very robust with their firmware sort of things. But yeah. Yeah. I don't know if they ever get firmware updates or whatever. Like I don't know that stuff. Yeah, they can blackmail where they can just hide you from people's vision if they don't like you. I should have always watched that. You become a blur. Well, there was also Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. Was this season 1 or 2? Season 1 with the Laughing Man. He was hacking people's eyes in real time and erasing himself from like. He could just erase himself from basically he could just walk places. Only people who are not modified, which was very few people at that point. So that was the thing. Yeah. The issue that the hearing cell died from the implant, so that they must suggest. Oh yeah. You have to be like if when they install hearing aids at that level, they always end up damaging part of, like it's just putting surgery in your ear will damage part of whatever hearing they have left. And so it's like you have to be very certain about everything you're putting in. It's like you have to be super careful. So that's right, Adam. Okay. Where were we? Okay, so yeah, so if you have a black box, then does it have a private language? You no longer can tell because if it's a black box. And if it was not a black box, then you can tell, but that's because you put it there. So can you think of an internal mental state on computers? The answer is no, according to this paper. Okay, tracking the state of a deep learning neural network such that its language could be publicly analyzed and correlated with its hardware state requires introducing shared context. For example, an AI could be rewarded for correctly identifying noses and ears, or for matching pictures of the same person's eyes rather than only their entire face. The AI could also be required to output not only the face classification, but also the feature classification in human concepts. In other words, whatever state the snooper wants to track at the hardware level must be tagged at the software level so that the snooper and AI are operating on a shared conceptual basis. Once those states have been tagged, the snooper can know what concept the AI is representing with a particular hardware state, and so validate the private language for a computer via a trivializing supervenience of software on hardware. Yeah, so that's the thing. They're doing phrenology at this point. This part of the computer is this is part of the computer is what lights up when they're talking about noses and stuff. Viper says, so if someone infects your cochlear implant with malware, are you getting hearing aids? AI Nobel Prize for figuring out that the human default 5 fingers per hand. Yeah. Okay. MDD Kaiwan says, my hearing aid meant to aid my hearing gave my hearing aids. Yes. So. Okay. And so this isn't going to solve the problem either once you have shared context. Author explains why. The trouble for Fodor is that once shared context has been reintroduced into an artificial intelligence, the possibility of systematic error is similarly reintroduced. Yeah, because how are you matching up this phrenology exactly is why I was making fun of it a little bit, because you're just sort of estimating what is the software doing at that hardware spot, but then you have systematic error. The whole point of Fodor's dilemma was to cast doubt on normativity, given Fodor's commitment to not normativity. It's not, you cannot make a mistake. It has to be following the program exactly. But if you're only guesstimating the parts of the hardware that light up when certain software is running, then there's error there. Computers' ability to follow rules and use public language without the possibility of systematic error was supposed to do the work in this argument. AIs with public concepts, however, are vulnerable to adversarial inputs. For example, a face-classifying AI could be given input photos with slight miscolorization and then systematically misclassify the locations of the eyes and ears of the people in the photos. Because the AI's concept eye is supposed to determinately refer to eyes and not ears, we can say that the AI systematically errs when given this adversarial input. Artificial intelligence is sophisticated enough to validate private language argument for computers, thus also validate normativity. Yeah, you have to be able to make mistakes. And once it's not following a strict rule set, then you don't actually know if it's making mistakes or not. Like they said, you could systematically misclassify it, or like I was saying, you could actually separate what the program and the hardware are doing. Different ways to do it. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think I'm right, but we can take the word of the author that this way also does it. The misclassification based on adversarial input. Anyhow, conclusion. Get this done. Fodor cannot win with his constructive dilemma against the private language argument based on computational examples. Computational systems simple enough to plausibly follow rules without the possibility of error use languages which are public in virtue of the intentionality of their programmers. Yeah, that was a terrible sentence. I'm sorry. Artificial intelligent computational systems which are complex enough to exhibit their own non-projected intentionality, meanwhile, introduce the possibility of systematic error in their attempts at rule following. Shared concepts can be used correctly or incorrectly and subject to adversarial attacks, creating systematic errors. Either way, computational languages use Computer language use is public for non-trivial reasons, so Fodor's dilemma fails to rebut Wittgenstein's argument against the possibility of private language. The language of thought program must reckon with how its concepts are shared and how systematic errors are possible. Fiend. Okay, so what do we think? The question is, do you actually believe in private languages? Do you think that you have something going on in your head that is not English? Or whatever your main language is? Spanish, German, Klingon, I don't know. And how do you interface with it then? Gorn. There you go. So this is the thing. If you think you do, that's something, but then you have to contend with this. How do you know and how do you describe it? You can't describe it to anyone else. You can only think about it yourself. And then how do you even describe it to yourself? You're going to be doing it in a public language like Gorn or English or whatever. Yeah, so Anne says, for me, is language emotions and sensations. Yeah, and that's fine. But like the emotions and sensations are different things from languages. Like that's what these philosophers would say. It's like, yeah, of course we have emotions, but that's not a private language. That's something else. That's part of, being human and how we feel and what we are. But it's not a language that like we can like access and talk about. So that's in some sense more fundamental than language to us, actually. Yeah, the language that body understands, like pain or cold. Exactly. So this is getting more down to like, what are we at that point? Language, the argument for private language is that language is actually kind of weak. We're not getting at all this fundamental stuff. And so the idea that we're going to get at with like these, formal languages, like programming languages, this argument is kind of like, well, no, Fodor's like, no, we are getting at it. What the deep stuff is with the formal programming languages. And this author is saying, not so fast. If you think you're talking about what we're talking about, and we can prove it, then all you're proving is that we're talking about what we're already talking about, and it's not something like an emotion or anything like that in the computer. On the other hand, if we can't just like point to it and like it's not a programming language, we can't guarantee that it's there either. Then we just don't know, and so it's not gonna say, hey, look, it's got some sort of deep language that might express thought or emotion that we're not getting at, because we just don't know what it's doing at that point. So you can't actually so this is an interesting argument in this sort of thing. This is again, this is not the sort of argument that's going to tell you anything about like what you should be doing with your life. This is Wittgenstein high analytic philosophy. But that's what it's doing. We're talking about computers, artificial intelligence, and meaning in our language. And this one's saying, no, the language can't get out of it, even if the language is a programming language that can generate a neural net, that can generate new content. Negative. I'm a meat popsicle. Yes. Multipass. MDD Chiron, but you can never make a meaningful statement about the sensations you have felt without language. Yeah, but that's right. But the point is that you're not making the meaningful statement without the language either. You're doing it in that language. That's the crux here. It's that you think you might be able to describe things to yourself without your public language. No, you can't. That's the genius of the private language argument. There is no private language, is that you have to use the language you have. You cannot use some sort of special internal language. It doesn't exist. Ivan says, okay, I think I see what the paper's trying to say. It took me a while to dredge up my thought on the private language argument. Yeah, this was the thing. You came in midway, and I knew there was going to be a problem because we're talking about stuff you like, but it's not talking about the stuff you like in what you probably thought it was. This is a different sort of thing. And so it's an interesting argument, but it's like, I knew like you had to get through, you had to, it takes a second with the philosophy. It's always a problem with streaming stuff. It's like you walk into the middle of philosophy, you don't know where you are. I wish I could do better on this. Viper says, mirror neurons light up when we see another individual experiencing something, so our internal sensations are impenetrable languages. Are our internal sensation an impenetrable language, or do we simply have a way to communicate it? that's the question. Like, what are we doing with language? And you might remember that the communication thing of language was a big deal up here. This was the issue. This is one of the things that, like, if it's only a communicative thing and it's not telling us anything deep about ourselves, that makes a big difference in this argument. And so that's kind of what's going on here, is if there's no private language, then in some sense it is a communicative thing. So DCI says Kripke has a good interpretation of this. Yeah, they explicitly referenced Kripke up here, saying this was going to be off like some of the stuff he said. Let's see. Two, or do we not? So what do we do? What did I get wrong in your statement there? We'll have to see another individual. So our internal says, or do we simply have no way to communicate it? No way to communicate it. No, we can communicate it. There's just no private way to communicate it. The thing is, so yeah, like when you see someone in pain and your mirror neurons fire and like you feel the pain or something, like you got some empathy for their pain. You can be like, yeah, I feel their pain, but like, you can't describe it in any other way except in like language. Maybe you're a poet, you do better than me, but in describing pain, but you can say I feel it and you can understand your feelings, but then if you try to communicate it, what do you do? Like, how do you do it? Maybe you can act, but that's a different thing. That's not language. This is the no private language argument. MDD Chiron says, but how does this provision for sort of feral child who has grown outside of society? Very good question. They do talk, I think Wittgenstein does talk about this. I think the idea is that you're going to still have a language, but it would still be publicly communicable. Like, you could still sort of discuss it with people if need be. You just have to learn it. It'd be like someone speaking a language that you could learn, but no one has yet. So you could think of like, there's a tribe that exists in the Amazon in Brazil. For all we know, they speak some language that no one has ever come up with before, but we could assume that, they're normal humans in some sense, and we can, if we wanted to, translate their language to ours, we could. So DCI says, good point. My sociopathic brain thinks in colors, then I select agreeable words. Yeah, well, this is not my point. This is Wittgenstein's point. And this is, as you can see, people are annoyed about this because they wanted computers to be smart, and Fodor was saying no. Like, Fodor's argument starts off with cognitive science is true, and cognitive science implies computation. Like, right here, this is one of these like, hey, we're doing science and our science is good. And computation means there's a language of thought. Like right here. Like that's the stuff. And so this is why people are concerned, because this seems like a very reasonable perspective. Cognitive science is true. Cognitive science implies some sort of computation, and then there's a language of thought because it's, running a program. And so people are trying to push back against this argument from Wittgenstein, who is a dead philosopher by this point. And they're saying, no, Wittgenstein must have been wrong, didn't understand the cognitive science, or didn't understand something about computers. And no, it's saying, no. Wittgenstein, the philosopher, was right, and we can go into it now, even though there were no neural nets when Wittgenstein was writing. Ivan Neo says Wittgenstein places some specific constraint on proper language. Private language doesn't meet the constraint that it can be mistaken, if I recall correctly. Well, it's the no private language argument is what we're talking about in this case. So I don't know exactly what he was talking about in formal languages, because of course Wittgenstein was big on logic. So he had lots of constraints on proper languages and what were being said. So I'm not exactly sure, Ivan. Viper says, so we can only say that it's a language when it's the middleman between neuron activation. Is farting a language, since just hearing it we can understand how it feels to be bloated? Well, I think that'd be closer to the mirror neuron, not the language thing. Like you can see, you might be able to see someone's pain. Like when they cry out, you hear them in pain and you can feel that. Same thing with the fart. Language is some sort of like, more complicated expression of it, I guess. Yeah, so maybe you should say that's how a person felt right before. I think that's, the person felt right before. And like, then the language is a public thing when we describe it. And you can say, ouch. and like you can say, okay, that person said the word ouch and therefore is in pain. But you know, they don't even have to be like ah, like they'll have to make it just like a sound, like an emotive sound. Like they can say the words and be like that hurts, and you can say that hurts. This is actually one of my problems. Like I cut my finger. I had to get some stitches, and I'm like, this really hurts when they were like stitching me up. I'm like, this really hurts. I don't think the anesthetic worked. And they're like, no, of course the anesthetic worked. I'm like, no, it didn't. Like I can feel all of this. And they're like, that can't be right. I was like, the nurses actually had one of the nurses had called the other nurses over because they're like, he's actually turning green. Like I was literally turning green. But when I say stuff, I'm like, I'm in a good amount of pain here. And they're like, no, you can't be. I'm like, the nurses are coming over to look at me because I'm turning green. It's like, I'm in pain. But like, I didn't say it that way. But I just said I'm in pain. And the guy's like, no, you don't sound like you're in pain. I'm like, I'm turning green. I don't sound like I'm in pain, but I'm turning green. Like I literally turned green. It was weird. You could see it like, it does happen. The language between our organs and the brain doesn't have to be known to us. We just see the byproducts of their communication. Yeah, that's the thing. This is the point, is that like it is not known to us. It's just, that's what they're saying. Like there could be something, but we can't talk about it. Frank says, feeling how you feel when you have been bloated isn't necessarily identical how they felt being bloated. Yeah, but you can understand something of it, I feel like. That's why I say, like, there's an old quote from Wittgenstein, if like lions could talk, we couldn't understand them. I don't know. Like, I feel like if a lion was hungry, we could talk about being hungry. Ivan Neal says, internally to your brain, a rabbit is whatever lights up in your rabbit neuron. Oh, we have a rabbit neuron. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know we had rabbit neurons. Since you only have the lighting up of a neuron as a criterion, you cannot be wrong in your internal word for rabbit. See, this is the direct reference thing here that Fodor was actually arguing for, saying that you can't be wrong about this. That's the question. If you were overfitting the word rabbit to my exact brain, it's like, yes, you can overfit whatever neurons light up, and that's a thing. But again, that's uninformative. Then you're just saying whatever my brain does for rabbit is rabbit. But that doesn't help you. And it says, like with a PC, I don't know how the program is programmed, but I use it either way. Yeah, like we can feel what like pains in our body, stuff like that. Not a problem. How our body does it, of course we don't know. It isn't easy being green. Green sign by name, green, yeah, green by nature. Yeah. That was like, it was just a small cut. Like, it wasn't that bad, but they put like, the local anesthetic and they just like missed or something. It was kind of annoying. But it's weird to have like the doctor be like the nurse is like, come on over. Like, come look at this guy. He's green. Like, yeah. Like, yeah. Kripkenstein, yeah. Let's see. Is there anything else to talk about here? Yeah. I don't know. So this is the thing. What can we actually learn about the private language argument? Like, because this is the philosophy stuff. I don't know. It's like, again, what are we exactly doing with the black boxes? Are we looking for the signs of intentionality? The question is, if we're going to learn, like if we're looking for like the singularity with programming, this is at least telling you don't look for private languages, because the chances of you actually learning something useful in terms of private languages to find out when computers get intelligent or there's a singularity or something like that, this is not the right strategy, at least. Viper says, I'm glad it was just only 5 pages, or we've been here all week. Yeah, this was a dense 5 pages. You can see it's like a very wide across the screen. And there was a lot of questions, which was cool. So, yeah. And like everyone's asking stuff, so that's cool. I like that. It's like better to discuss stuff than back in the early days when like, no one was here. Or like, one of my Minesweeper friends would take pity and lurk. And I'd just be reading it and be like, only me, and nobody's in chat. It's like, all right, I'm still giving my same old opinions. Now, let's see. What am I going to say? I do have my emotes. And, oh, no. No emotes? There we go. What would I give this one? Yeah, so I'm going to try and do a little emo judge. I've spent a lot of time programming and thinking how I'm going to do this. I have not got anything finished yet. This stuff is actually hard to figure out how to do this. Like, I'm thinking, like, I need overlays. For people who don't know, I want to start publishing reviews of these papers. So, like, in this case, this paper, what would I give it? This one, has nothing to do with existentialism, so it does not get the scream. It is it belly gazing? Is it navel gazing? Yeah, a little bit. This is talking about one argument against that. I think it had some fun ideas, so it's gonna get a brain dance. It didn't fuck up the argument or like kind of shy away, so it's not getting the shrivel. And I don't think, oopsie, and it's not getting a golden turd. I don't think it overpromised and underdelivered either. Like, I don't think it like said like big things and then just shit its pants. Now the question is, it's gonna get a scalpel because it kind of sliced in. This is analytic philosophy. This is like when you're doing this sort of thing where you're like listing premises and conclusions and then showing how the argument got thing. It's gonna get a scalpel. The question is, does it get any Ouroboros? Did it do any like big deals here? I'm gonna give it one Ouroboros. So basically, this is not a super crazy article, but I would give it like maybe one Ouroboros for talking about artificial intelligence and language. It would probably get two or three, like two scalpels, maybe three, for doing the slice and dice of someone else's argument. That's the analytic philosophy thing. Little navel gazing. I mean, this is a proceedings of the International Symposium, so this is basically talking Wittgenstein to Wittgenstein people. It's a little navel gazing, but it also gets a brain dance because it is talking about artificial intelligence and private language, like deep learning. So it's getting a little bit of the fun contemporary stuff that might not have expected to get that here. And so pretty good score for an analytic paper. Yeah, this is like really not bad. To be fair, I'm a Wittgensteinian. This is kind of stuff I like. So, yeah, it's a little bit, I'm a little biased in this direction myself. Vipers gives it a schloop out of floppy doo. Floop de doo. Good. That sounds like a very nice, wow, Vipers, that's great. A schloop out of floop de doo. Yeah, so in the future, I'm going to make it easy for everyone else to, if you have Better TTV installed, you can see, you'll be able to see these. If you don't have it, get it installed. It'll make your Twitch experience much better. Unfortunately, I don't read German, so I have no idea what that means. But and then everyone, if you want, you will be also able to review the things, and I'll have it published up with your review included. And then also I'll make it so you can type in something if you want.